Hello and welcome to the FatBoss Guide to Malkorok, 10-man heroic in the Siege of Orgrimmar.
Hello.
And this fight has become a lot more spherical, Lawrence. There's a lot of orbs.
There is,
There's a lot of orbs that you need to deal with, but otherwise the fight remains fairly unchanged, to be honest. There's like one or two new mechanics that you need to deal with.
Now, if you haven't seen our normal mode guide for this encounter, please do click upon the annotations you see on your screen now. We're not going to go through all the normal mode mechanics in depth, as we're only going to focus on the heroic changes.
So for this fight, you want to bring 2 tanks, 2 healers, and 6 DPS. Bringing 1 melee is really quite nice, to be honest.
Yeah, but you don't want to bring more than 1 melee. Because of the imploding energy, there'll always be 1 like in melee range. Out of the 3, there'll always be like 1 close to melee. And ideally the tank shouldn't be taking them, because the tanks won't be using any like significant cooldowns in phase 1. So if you can bring like a rogue that can just like feint every single one, or it doesn't really matter, you can bring pretty much any melee DPS just to soak the one in melee, that's awesome.
Now we're going to go through this phase by phase, and to start off we're going to talk about phase 1. So the shield that you get is the same, you know, the shield that you get across the whole raid that absorbs all the healing that you get. It works exactly the same as normal, still 100% of your maximum HP. You should always really have that topped up, especially going into imploding energies and stuff like that. Make sure you have it quite high, because you need to absorb the damage.
Now the imploding energy, you still get 3 spawn, and like we say, you still will get the one that spawns in melee. Now these just do more damage, and essentially if you don't use some sort of DR when they come in, like any form of damage reduction, you will lose your shield. It won't really do all that much damage to you after your shield. I mean, obviously it depends on your HP, but they seem to do about the same amount as a maximum shield. But if you use a cooldown, you won't lose your shield.
Arcing Smash and with the Breath of your Sage is exactly the same, so he'll do 3 of them, mark them out, and then after 3 of them he'll do his Breath, which like makes them all explode again. And if you get hit by any of these, you're bad. Don't get hit by any of these.
So
there is an add-on that you can get that makes it so you can, it like marks it out on this like circle. And
serious?
Yeah, it's seriously this add-on. And I've seen people play with it and it's not 100% accurate, so if you do have that, take that with a pinch of salt, or, you know, don't rely on add-ons to hold your hand through the whole of this expansion.
Are we going to put this in the description?
No, I'm not going to put it in the description.
Okay, don't use the add-on.
Just be good, for God's sake.
Ignore the add-on.
Yeah, so if you do use the add-on, at least just keep in mind that it isn't 100% accurate.
Now the fatal strikes are still being placed on the tank, and you want to swap around the 10 to 15 mark. As I said right at the start of this video, try not to use any cooldowns at all in this first phase. You'll understand when we talk about phase 2. But ultimately, if you do have to use a cooldown, try and use it towards the end of your strikes, because obviously the more strikes you have, the more damage you're taking. And again, this boss, the enrage timer, is exactly the same as normal mode. It is only 6 minutes. There's only 2 things that have been changed on heroic, and the one major one is these orbs. Now these orbs will spawn frequently underneath players, and they'll activate after about 2 seconds or so, and any player that is hit by one of these orbs, it will instantly remove your shield, no matter how high or how low the shield is, and you'll immediately take 150k damage after the shield has been removed. So if someone does get hit by an orb, it's not terrible, but it does mean that you need to heal them back up again, especially if they've just had a green shield and then they take an orb. It means you need to heal them for like 5 to 700k again, which is a little frustrating. But ultimately, you should try and make it so you do not stand on these orbs. And as the fight goes on and on, you're going to have like loads of these orbs up, and they're going to be absolutely everywhere. What you should try and do is try and make sure that the orbs aren't too close together, and that they're not like closing off pathways into certain sections of the room. Because if you get an imploding energy on like right at the back of the room, and there's like a line of orbs in the way, you can't just run through the orbs and then get the imploding energy, because you won't have a shield and you'll just insta-die.
Yeah.
So don't shut off the room, and you can obviously do this by positioning. Just make sure you're not positioned near an orb. Try and keep them as spread out as much as you possibly can. But ultimately, they're not a big deal, just don't get hit by them.
Now there is one change to Seismic Slam in this phase as well. That's the thing that just knocks you up in the air and does a bunch of damage, and then you fall down again. When this does happen to you, an ad will spawn, and it has an annoying slow aura. It slows you by 75% and also slows your casting by 75%. So what you need to do as a tank, taunt it over, and everyone blow it up. Hard mode. It
hasn't got a lot of health. It's just more annoying than anything else. One thing, if it stays up for too long on the tank, it's quite likely that the aura will also be affecting the melee DPS. So that can make it difficult for that person to get to the imploding energy if it like crosses over. So it is really important that when this ad does spawn, just blow it up.
Yeah.
So essentially phase 1, it's all about spreading out. Make sure you don't have too much melee. You need to position your raids so you're completely spread out, so you can cover all of the imploding energies, and just make sure you don't run over an orb. And that's essentially phase 1. It's very, very simple. Now phase 2 is more or less the same as it was on normal mode, however there's a few key changes that prevent you from probably using the tactic you used on normal mode. Now the displacing energy debuff, the one that you can dispel, this now roots you on heroic mode, so as soon as this player gets it, they cannot move unless they're dispelled. And one thing to note, when you do dispel this player, it will do AoE damage around that player, but not to the player themselves. So this does prevent your whole entire raid stacking up on the tank, because if you do dispel it, the tanks are going to take the damage as well. And if the tanks do have Fatal Strike stacks, which they will towards the start of the phase, they're just going to die immediately. So the way that we do this phase, we have the entire raid spread out, and the only people that are taking like the Blood Rage, the cleave damage from the boss, is just the 2 tanks. However, the Blood Rage on Heroic, it does far more damage. It hits for 2.4 million physical damage, and that's split between 2 targets, so they're taking 1.2 million damage each before armor, which is a lot. Your armor reduction, like for some classes, like warriors and paladins, will probably be between 50 and 60%, so you're still taking absolute ginormous hits. And one of the tanks will have Fatal Strike stacks as well, so that tank will be taking even more damage. Now this phase only lasts 20 seconds, so this is why tanks want to save all their cooldowns for this one point, and both tanks just stand there and just take the brute force of damage for those 20 seconds. And this also gives the tanks an absolute ginormous amount of vengeance, so you guys can do huge damage, or if you're a paladin you can do massive heals, monks you can do massive shields on yourself, and this does help with your survivability. But ultimately you need to work out for your class what cooldowns you need to rotate for those 20 seconds in order for you to survive. Now the tank that has the Fatal Strikes debuff, they should probably be getting help from outside healers or other raid members using things like Sacrifice or Pain Suppression or Iron Bark or Bubble or whatever you can do to help that tank survive.
Now some people actually might want to 3-tank the fight because of this. So say your tanks just, if they haven't got the gear or anything like that and get completely destroyed, you can replace your melee DPS with a tank. That means that, well, one, your Fatal Strikes will be lower throughout the whole fight as well, because you can switch more often, and the melee imploding energy that you can get, you can just throw a tank in it and they'll take even less damage because they're a tank and got loads of health and everything like that. So if you are going to bring another tank, just replace your melee DPS with that tank.
And as a healer during phase 2, just instantly dispel the debuff, because anyone who gets it should already be spread out. That means no one else will take any damage from it, so you can just insta dispel it. And really you just want to spam heal your tanks. Like as a druid you want to have your shroom ready to explode on them just in case one of them drops low. And literally almost every hit will take, I mean it depends what tank is tanking, but I mean like our paladin for example, because he has Fatal Strike stacks, even with like all of his cooldowns rolling, he's still taking 60 or 70% of his health every single hit. So you need to like pre-cast all your heals and just spam it on that one target.
Now an interesting thing you can do in phase 2 is of course you still got all these orbs up and they're a massive pain, however you haven't got your shield anymore. So what we do is that we get our Shadow Priest, rogues can be good at this, anyone who can pretty much just have a fat damage reduction on themselves who isn't a tank, because of course the tanks are quite busy at this point. What we did, we got a Shadow Priest who is an engineer, he rocket bootsed, went Dispersion, and picked up thousands of orbs. This just clears up the whole room, and of course, it means that even if the health does drop a bit low, you can still heal them and their health will go up because you have the shield now. It just clears up so much space because, of course, you're going to do another phase 1 after this, and it's going to get more and more and more orbs.
And after this, like, phase 2 is over, you do have, like, a 3 or 4 second grace period where you can start, like, healing people's shields up again. And this is really when you want to use like healing cooldowns like Tranquility and stuff like that. I mean, you could use them on the pool as well. They will be slightly off though. If you decide to use them right on the pool, it'll be about 10 seconds after you've had the phase 2 that they'll be up again. It doesn't actually tie in perfectly, so you kind of want to just balance that out and work that out yourself where you want to use your cooldowns, but we always use them immediately after the second phase. Now ultimately, if your DPS is high enough, you'll never get a second phase 2. And after the second phase 2 is when the boss berserks anyway. But if you do get a second phase 2, all tank cooldowns should be back up. I mean, the fight's timers are set up like that, so they are up in time for that. But ultimately, you shouldn't get that second phase 2. So really, the whole fight is just about dealing with like the new orb mechanic and obviously taunting the add-in in phase 1. And then in phase 2, just make sure your tanks don't die. And if you do have some sort of immunity like bubble or whatever, just so you can run around and pick up as many orbs as you possibly can, just so the room's clearer. That helps, but you don't actually need to do that. That's just something that might help you during your progression. But apart from that, it's a very decent fight.
It is a very cool fight.
And it's probably one of the first heroics that are actually very difficult, so good luck.
So thank you guys for watching. If this guide did help you out, then please do give us a like, it helps us out a lot. And make sure to comment, rate and subscribe.
And if you'd like to see other 10-man heroic guides by FatBoss, please do click up on the annotations you see on your screen now, and they take you straight to those videos.
Thanks for watching.
Thanks for watching.
Thank you.